I think we're ready in the back, so James, take it away.
Okay. Hi, my name is James Bearden. Been working with Java since about 2000, back in the swing days. About 5 years ago, I started my own company, and the main thing about that company is a medical records and billing system called chartcaddy.com. And when I was writing the software, you know, it's online, so you need an online front end for that. And a few years ago, JavaScript was just getting hot with stuff like Node and Angular and stuff like that. And I didn't really want to learn it. And I was looking for something that could work as a front end and leverage my existing Java skills. And at the time, Google Web Toolkit had just come out, and Google was using it for a whole bunch of their internal stuff. So I took a look at that and decided that was for me. Again, mostly so I wouldn't have to learn JavaScript. The point of Google Web Toolkit is that you write your front end and your back end and whatever you want in Java, and it compiles it to JavaScript, basically. So you develop in Java, and you can use Eclipse or any other IDE you want. And there's a development environment, so you can recompile on the fly without having to wait. And it ends up as a JavaScript HTML website with CSS. And you actually use CSS to style your website. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the stuff here on the slides, and then I'm going to show you the code a little bit later. And then eventually I'm going to show you ChartCaddy itself. I'm not a front-end guy. That's another reason why I like this, is because you can throw up some code that works and spend as much time as you want, or as little time as you want, making it look good. All right, so Java Web Toolkit is, like I said, you write in Java, and it compiles to JavaScript. It uses a whole bunch of mechanisms to optimize that JavaScript, because inherently anything automated like that is not so fast. So it does things like, you know, remove code that isn't actually used. It compiles specific JavaScript for different browsers. So it compiles it 5 times, once for Internet Explorer, Internet Edge, Safari, and, you know, Chrome. So when a user comes to your website, that statically compiled JavaScript is just sitting there optimized for that web browser. So you get really good performance out of it. When you're developing, it isn't statically compiled. It's got this magical compiler gateway interface thingy to where the browser requests JavaScript, and it hits the compile, and it's compiler, and it's basically compiled on the fly. So when you're developing with Google Web Toolkit, it's not so fast. But when you actually deploy it to a website, it's really fast. In addition, basically, Google Web Toolkit is straight up Java. There's very little exception to that. The 2 exceptions are that when you're writing client-specific code, there are some client-specific libraries you need to use. And I have to check, but I think it even automatically uses the right ones if you specify it. What I mean by that is, what Google has done is they have basically rewritten some core Java libraries like Java util string and Java util date and Java util calendar and all that stuff to be more easily translatable to JavaScript. And as far as you're concerned, it's the same API. So you use it as you normally would, those libraries. But then when Google Web Toolkit compiles it, it turns it into JavaScript. The other exception is there's one file that you use to tell the Google Web Toolkit compiler that there's special stuff, like you want to include a special library, or you want to turn on debugging or turn off debugging or something like that. So other than being mostly regular Java, you can also use JavaScript. You can intermingle JavaScript and Java. There's a relatively new feature called JS Interrupt, which basically translates JavaScript data types to Java data types. So if you want to use mostly Java, but you have this JavaScript library you really like or have to use for some reason, you can call into that JavaScript library from the Java client. And it has all the bells and whistles. Part of the benefits of basically being real Java is that you can do JUnit testing, and it works nicely in an IDE with debuggers and stuff like that. The backend is, if you have whatever backend you use, if any, that is pure Java, and you can use any Java library you want on the backend. And whether that is some sort of a servlet, or a Python server, or a Perl server, which is what I use. The Google Web Toolkit is mostly about the client, and it doesn't care about the server part of your code. The interesting thing about that is that because for the client you use special Google libraries sometimes, like util and string and calendar, you can do some things on the server side if you have both a Java server and a Java client that you can't do in the client. And that's one of the things to be mindful about. That's part of the badness that we'll get to in the next slide. This is the goodness. The next slide is the badness. So yeah, you can use the backend, anything you want to do. When it started out, it had this cool feature, and it still has this cool feature where if the backend is Java and the front end is Java, you can do RPC calls eventually. So you can send POJOs from the server to the client, and the client is in reality, when it's deployed, JavaScript, but you're talking as if it were a Java-heavy client, but it's not. It's really JavaScript. Then they kind of not really depreciated that, but they focused on a more mainstream JSON versus over HTTP type setup because it's less limiting. A lot of people wanted to use existing services, existing backends for the client. Another advantage to this is that it's easily deployable to Google App Engine. There's special libraries and stuff where you get it right, you write it locally, you get it working the way you want, and then you can just deploy that to Google App Engine, which is basically cloud-based, so you don't really have to worry about scaling the client part. You can code. The UI is either you can code it in Java like you would do Swing or JavaFX or something like that, or it has a XML way of doing it to where you define a form and buttons and widgets in XML, so you can 100% separate your layout code from your logic code. It also uses CSS, and that's how you style stuff. It comes with some default themes, which are pretty lame, but they're enough to get you started. It's like what do they call it? Classic, which looks like it's a 15-year-old Swing app. And then they've got light and dark, and then they've got one other, I forget what they call it, but basically it's minimal to where it just looks weird. So you start with that, and then you can use CSS to make it look like whatever you want with the styling and stuff like that. Again, you can use it with IDE. They go into Eclipse a lot. It's very well supported by Eclipse. Most of the examples that you see on the website, and let me pull that up real quick, if I can. There we go. The website is pretty good. Let's see, let's just search for it. Don't have it up and ready. But the website's pretty good. That's where you go to look at the API, and it walks you through a lot of steps if it ever comes up. And it's not actually written in Google Web Toolkit. It's just a straight up website. That's where you go to download the SDK. The SDK comes basically in two versions, a standalone one that you use on a command line. That's not really streaming very well, is it? Okay. We're having technical difficulties. This is not like working good. There we go. There we go. That's the website I'm looking for. This is where you go to get the latest version. It's, it's supported by Google, but I'm not sure they're really using it as much as they used to. So it generally follows Java release cycles too. So you have to wait usually 6 months to a year to be able to use the latest, greatest version of Java with it. But it's fairly well supported. And you really don't have to worry about it not being supported with Google. So let's look at go back to this slide, if I can. Okay. I personally am not a IDE kind of guy. I'm more of a console, terminal, Emacs kind of coder. So I don't really use an IDE, and we'll get to that in a little bit when I show you the examples. It does have an integrated Jetty development server if you do want the backend to be a servlet written in Java, and that's kind of nice because then it all just kind of works. It uses Ant by default to run everything on the backend. That's what I use when you don't use an IDE. Do you have a question?
Well, I was wondering why you put down Badness.
Well, it's not there because it's optional. You don't have to do the badness. It does have pretty robust internationalization. It's got this thing called a bookmark application state, which I use in ChartCaddy, so that when the user uses their back button, it actually does something intelligent or relatively intelligent. The problem with that is that you kind of define what that means. So it hands you basically you come up with some sort of a bookmarking coding scheme. And when they hit the back button, it hands you that scheme, and you figure out what to do with it. The final goodness thing about it is that since you end up with just a regular old JavaScript, HTML, CSS website, that this works well with PhoneGap / Cordova if you want to turn your website into a mobile app, a native mobile app. So that's the goodness. Before we move on to the badness and then the examples, do we have any questions? Nothing? Going once? Yeah, and if you have any questions or comments, just call them out in the middle. I'm not really on a roll here. It's not like my day job. So, okay. So, all right, so now we get to the badness. And the badness is actually not that bad. Like I was saying earlier, the development mode is kind of slow. It can take upwards of a minute to initially compile, and then when you change something, it might take a good 10-15 seconds to recompile what's changed. So there's a little bit of lag in that. It's not bad once you get up and running, but the initial compile is definitely go get yourself a cup of coffee after you kick it off type of thing. It has awkward time zone support, so if you care about that, it handles differences, plus minus 6 hours. It handles that fairly well, but there is nothing like Joda time or anything like that you can use on the client to deal gracefully with dates and time zones. What I do is I mostly ship all that off to the server and have the server deal with it. And so only thing I have to worry about is presentation of the right time zone on the client. And my client is extremely dumb, but it gets the job done. Again, the main thing with Google Web Toolkit is that it's client specific. So in addition to having you're limited to whatever Java libraries Google Web Toolkit has implemented for the base libraries like util, all the utils and stuff like that. They are mostly good about that, especially the important ones, the one you use most often, but there might be some esoteric ones that they don't support. Over time that's gotten better, so there may be nothing major that isn't supported at this point. And then occasionally you run into weirdness, especially again with the dates and times, so it's kind of really hard to get a current date and time out of the client. There's a special trick you have to Google for and find. And on top of that, there are the third-party libraries for Google Web Toolkit. Since it's not as popular as other solutions. There aren't as many options. So there is a drag and drop library and there is a crypto library that you use. And if that doesn't work, you're on your own. And finally, again, it's supported, but not as supported as it used to be. So if you go mess around with Google Web Toolkit, the definitive tutorial they present is called Stock Watcher, and it's broken. You have to actually fix the tutorial for it to run. Okay, so that is that.
When was the last release?
The releases are actually pretty often. Was there getting started maybe? It was like every few months, about twice a year or so, they come out with a new version. That's, yeah, let's see.
It's not like a brand new project on GitHub that hasn't been updated.
Yeah. It doesn't really, the newest version is 2.8, and let's see if I can find, there's a, yeah, 2.8.2 apparently. So I'm not really going to cover the mechanics of running it because I'm probably everybody else on the planet uses an IDE and I don't. So we're just not going to do that. We're going to go here. So first of all, I'm going to show you, this is when you download it, this is what the structure of your project looks like. This is unit testing stuff. This is the simple tutorial that I got working. And right here, this is the business end of it right here. Everything else is sort of extraneous extra. That and this build XML right here. So the two important magical, I guess, files that aren't directly code related are build.xml, and that's actually an Ant thing. So if you've ever messed with Ant before, that's how you compile it, clean it up, run it. It's sort of like a little scripting concept that you use. You don't really mess with that, but you need to know how. For example, if you don't use the built-in Jetty server, you got to go to, I went in and disabled it, and there was some other weird stuff. So you mostly don't have to mess with that. This other one, let me pull it up here. Let me do this. Let me pull up the, nope, that's not what I want. Let me, pull up the build just so you can see what it looks like. And then you can maybe. So this is what it looks like, and it has basically targets. It's like a new age makefile is what it is, and it's a fairly standard thing. So you can compile it or build it for production or whatever. And there used to be this thing called hosted or dev mode, and that's one of the things that was broken in the tutorial because that doesn't exist anymore, because that used to leverage a browser mechanism that was deemed unsafe and has since been removed from all modern browsers. So now, instead of using dev mode, you use super dev mode, and that's one of the things I added here, super dev mode, to get it working. Again, Google Stack Overflow is your friend. And okay, so that's that. And the other magic file you have to worry about besides code is down with the client code, source, Google Web Toolkit sample, Stock Watcher, this one right here. This is probably the only special sauce type file there is with Google Web Toolkit, and this is what the Google Web Toolkit compiler looks at. So this is outside the source code itself, and for example, if you need to include one of the external libraries, or you want to set the logging level, or anything like that, this is the file you mess with, the default logging. Okay, so what I've done is since it takes a while to run, I've gone ahead and I ran ant SDM super dev mode, and it took forever, and it compiled, and there's lots of warnings because the tutorial isn't really supported. And then, oh yeah, you get that. Is there any way to minimize this doohickey? Nope. Okay. So you can't really see it. Let's see if I can move it up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. It says this code server says the code server is ready at whatever, like at this address right here. And you get all excited, and you go there, and it's disappointing because this is what it looks like. It goes, hey, this is what it is. Okay, so now we're getting into the dev mode, and how the dev mode works is the compiler has not compiled it to the production level optimized JavaScript. It actually, I don't know exactly what it does, but it's sort of like this intermediate step where it gets in between the browser and the JavaScript and then compiles the Java on the fly somehow. So what that means is that if you go to the file and you load it up, okay, come on now, don't be that way. Let's try, yep, that should be right. You gotta love a demo. Okay, let's try starting it. Thank you. All right, it worked earlier. It is ready. It really is. It's happy. It's turned on. It's running. Let's try opening it up again. All right, apparently I can't show you the goodness. So this tutorial, it's not really serving up the thing. That's what I was going to say. The code server is not really what you use to run the app. It's what you use to control the exterior compiling process. So let's try compiling again. Let's try that. Okay. Now, let's try. So, hold on. Come on. There we go. Dev mode on. Compile. Yay! Okay. When I work with ChartCaddy, it's a little bit more complicated. This is about as basic as it gets. So I have to restart my server and all sorts of stuff for it to be happy. So it takes a while. Again, this is not a fast laptop and this is not a fast process, so this goes on. And then while we're waiting on that, I'm going to load up the source code and open client stockwatcher.java. Okay, this is the actual code. So let's go back here to the web browser, and it's still working on it. And the stockwatcher option itself, or app, is not that exciting. You just enter a whole bunch of random numbers, and it pretends it's going off to the server and getting stock quotes for it once it loads up. So far, I've been pretty happy with Google Web Toolkit. I mean, it gets the job done. It took me a couple weeks to write the app, and then I've hardly touched it since then. You can make it as complicated as you want. There's all sorts of widgets. There's a widget showcase you can look at. It has all the ones you're used to. I can show you that as soon as this thing is done. Is this running into a problem, perhaps? Nope, it's just chugging along. Oh, it might be done. Maybe. There we go. So here it is in all its glory. And you just add ASDF and click add, and it just randomly gives you stock quotes, and they are truly random. And so let's say this is your app and you want to go make a change. This is the whole build up for this, is you come in here and you're looking at your code and whatever you're doing. And where is something visible? Last updated. Let's put some exclamation points in there. And you save. And you go back here and it's not updated yet. So, but then if you want it to do it, you recompile. And hopefully it will go faster this time because it wasn't an initial compile. And so I changed the source code and this little tag right here should update on the fly. And that's the magic. It is really magic because you write in Java and you end up with JavaScript, and yet you can still rapidly develop like this. That's what I like about it. I like not having to learn JavaScript. That's what I really like about Google Web Toolkit.
How long have you been using it?
About 5 years. Well, let's see how long it's going here. It's thinking about it.
While that's running, are you familiar with Badness?
I've heard of it, have not used it. Badness. That's sort of like an enhanced version. Somebody said I can do better, and they kind of basically put a toolkit on top of a toolkit to make it add features they thought were missing. So here it is. Our code has been updated right there. And on a real computer, it goes a lot faster. This is not a real computer. So that's that. Let me show you. Let me stop the server and show you my application. That's all glory. So if you go to chartcaddy.com, I'm going to show you a little more polished one. App. Well, I'll show you the website first. So this is how I make my money, chartcaddy.com. It is an online medical records and billing system. It's super awesome. And then you click on login. And at this point, the app is loaded. And this is all Google Web Toolkit. And if you look at the code or look at the source, you'll be disappointed because it all manipulates the DOM. That's what Google Web Toolkit does. So there's no looking at the source code to do it. And how you debug, if you do put in there, you can use logging code if you want, and all you do is pull up a console and it logs to the console if you want to view your logging. It does cool stuff. This right here, the calendar right here, that's one of the few libraries that third-party libraries I use. So it will show stuff on the library. This result set thing right here, this data grid, is something that I came up with myself just because that's the way I am. Let me show you my file that I use to compile. Okay, so this is my special sauce file. It's a little bit longer than the tutorials. So I'm doing some different stuff. So I'm using the standard theme. There's also the clean, the chrome, and the dark theme. And those are like base themes, or you can disable them all and do everything in CSS. But some of the widgets in Google Web Toolkit are really complicated, and that gets kind of ridiculous if you start from scratch. And these are standard Google libraries, Google Web Toolkit libraries. So I'm talking HTTP over JSON, and I'm using the built-in logging mechanism. At some point, I may be encrypting stuff. Right now, I'm just using regular HTTPS to encrypt. Again, there is the one crypto library, so I haven't spent time beating that into submission yet. Let's see. So this is, I think this is uploading and downloading files. Surprisingly, that's kind of hard with Google Web Toolkit because basically it's a Java app floating out there, so it can't take advantage of the usual browser stuff, so it needs a library to handle uploading and downloading files. The calendars is the one I show you, and this drag and drop is so you can drag and drop files onto the app. And here's how you do logging. It's kind of weird. I currently have logging disabled for production, but then you can set the log level, stuff like that. So this is a trick I use to reduce the compile time. So not only does it compile individually for 5 or 6 different browsers, it also compiles for 20 or 30 different languages. So if you define that, no, I just want English, thank you very much, then it really cuts down the compile time on it. Okay, so, all right, well that is dealing with Google Web Toolkit. I could show you the entry point if you want, but it's not really that exciting. And I could.
While you're out, can you see some of the widget classes? Just kind of
Okay.
sense of how you build
Okay. Let me show you the entry point. So this is like the entry point to my code, and you even though you define Java util date, the Google Web Toolkit compiler actually looks at that and goes, no, we're not going to use Java's util date. We're going to use our util date, and it replaces it with its own. And all you do is it implements entry point, and then you go about on module load, and you go about your business. And I was going to show you the web, what it looks like on the web too. So let's do. The HTML, to launch it, there's 2 important bits to it. This right here is how it does that bookmarking thing. So the back button on the browser, back and forth browser, that just tells Google Web Toolkit that you want to use that feature. And the only other thing you do is this includes the actual JavaScript, and I don't know exactly what actually. I think just that. Just including that JavaScript, it takes over the loading process. Okay, and what did you want to see?
I was just curious to see.
The widgets?
Yeah, just what that code might look like.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to show us your code.
I might as well. It's maybe not the best code.
Stockwatch is a little simpler, so
Oh yeah, Stockwatch is way simple. So Google Toolkit, source, client, GUI.
And if you could show us code that makes us a lot of money.
Yeah, all right. So all right, I have to explain this a little bit. So part of the business of medical records is that, especially with behavioral health, is that everybody thinks their forms are the best. Even though they're regulated by law, what goes on each form, everybody's form is different. So a key feature of my application is that theoretically every organization can have a different form. Even though it's the same name, phone, like an assessment or a progress note, they could look different per organization. So that causes problems because you don't want to hard code that every time you get a customer. So what I've built into ChartCaddy is there's exactly one hard-coded button in ChartCaddy, and that's to deal with conflicts. When 2 people save something at the same time, There's one button to deal with that. Other than that, it loads metadata out of the database and lays out windows and adds buttons and fields and labels and such from the database. So if you look at this code, it's kind of convoluted because it's pulling stuff, it's getting a big JSON dump of the metadata. And it's saying, you know, okay, we have this section, and this section has 5 buttons. And we have this section over here, and it has 2 fields on it and a label. And so it looks kind of weird because it's going through all that JavaScript and picking it out. And then down below here, this is where it actually is adding the widgets to the frame. So here, there's a new HTML right here. So that's like a label. And then down below here, there is, this is one of those result sets I was talking about, the data sets right here, which is a, what is that called? Flex, wait a minute, what is it? No, that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, it would take a while to explain all this. And I had to make my own date box so you can extend the widgets that are there. I extended the existing field widget to know about time zones. And there is no thing that says Central, Standard, Mountain. That is not built into any library I could find, so I had to write it myself. Yeah, this is too hard to explain. All right, let me open up the Stockwatcher one. Oh, it's already open. There we go. Okay, so this is the tutorial. Flex table is like a table, grid bag, I guess. So where's it getting the main panel? Okay, so it creates a panel, it adds it to the root right here. Symbol text box. Yeah. Where does it create a symbol text box? Does it set it up here? Okay, here we go. Here it is. So it does it this way. So it's talking about panels and tables and text boxes, buttons and labels. And it defines them globally for some reason. And then, right there. You know, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's once you wrap your head around how the widgets work, it's mostly just Java. You know, you have to do anonymous interclasses if you go that route. I'm not sure. I think it might just have supported Java 1.8. I'm not sure. Type stuff. I know it's got lambdas now. Yeah. But it's pretty straightforward. Really the only you can think of it as basically Java with its own widgets. That's what developing is like with Google Web Toolkit. You got to use the Google Web Toolkit widgets. The Badness thing that he was talking about, that's another set of widgets that you could use. I've noticed the current trend with Google Web Toolkit, they're getting more into the integration with JavaScript. So they're making it easier to interoperate with JavaScript libraries because that's where the world is going apparently. Okay. Any questions? Wow, that Slack thing doesn't work so good.
Do you know of any other companies that are using Google Web Toolkit in production?
Well, I know Google itself is using it for some things. I mean, if you go to their overview, it tells you, I mean, they used to use them in a lot more products. I don't know if they're phasing it out or what, but they uses in AdWords, AdSense, I don't know, AdWords, AdSense, Flights, Hotel Finder, Offers, Wallet, and Blogger. But, you know, it's really hard to know unless they advertise it, because if you go to somebody's website, it's just a website. It doesn't really say, there's no real telltale that it's a Google Web Toolkit website, because you can style it any way you want. You can style it to look like a regular website. So overall, I mean, it fit my needs, again, because I didn't want to learn JavaScript. So if you really don't want to learn JavaScript, Google Web Toolkit is awesome.
So 5 years on into this project, would you use Google Web Toolkit today?
Yes, I would. I mean, again, I mean, I wish it was supported a little bit more. It's not really supported badly, but it's okay. There's okay support. The user group is not bad. If you go to the user group and ask questions, they're pretty good about answering it. It's just after a new version of Java is released, it does take 6 months to a year for Google Web Toolkit to support whatever features are in that Java. There are some holes you have to be aware of, because Google is basically duplicating a lot of Java libraries. Stuff like the time zones and the dates handling is a little bit tricky. You have to be mindful of stuff like that. That's really the big problem I've had, though, is dates and time zones. I've having to write my own workarounds for limitations. But there aren't a lot of limitations in the basic libraries that Google supply. Other than that.
If you have to design the replace, there's what other solutions have you looked into anything else?
Have I done anything else?
Anything else other than
In Google Web Toolkit?
no, what I'm saying is that if you have to replace Google Web Toolkit, do you see anything else?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, if you wanted to go full JavaScript stack, for sure. I mean, really the only alternative to this, the best alternative, is JavaScript itself, and whether that's, you know, Angular or Ember or something like that. But I mean, I don't know of anything. This is the only thing I know where you write Java and it spits out JavaScript. That's the only thing I know of.
When you were contemplating on writing this in Google Web Toolkit, did there any other technology come into mind?
Yeah, I know. The question is, when I initially chose Google Web Toolkit 5 years ago, did I seriously contemplate any other solutions? And the answer is it really was between Google Web Toolkit and learning a JavaScript library of some sort, framework, toolkit, whatever you want to call it. And honestly, I don't regret that decision, because, you know, the problem with JavaScript is there's too much churn, I think. I mean, like 3 years ago, Angular was king, and now Ember is king, but then there might be something 2 years from now that everybody's using with JavaScript, where Google Web Toolkit, it's like Java itself. It's not perfect. It's not it's not as used as much, but it's pretty steady. It takes the same mindset of Java itself, in that they don't really get rid of features, they just depreciate them. So you don't even, 5 years on, I really haven't made substantial changes in my code, even though several Java major versions have come out.
Is Google Web Toolkit just a Java to JavaScript compiler with a GUI toolkit?
If you want to be crass about it, yeah, that's the case. I mean, again, I think it leverages a lot of advantages that come with Java, that you have to that JavaScript toolkits have to work around. That's, one of the major things that JavaScript toolkits do is they add some safety nets for JavaScript, and Java has that built in, and those safety nets are built into the IDE level, so that you catch a lot of these issues during compile rather than have it blow up in production. So basically, you get a lot of the advantages of Java, but you end up with a JavaScript product.
And it does abstract the client-server communication, right? So you don't have to
That's yeah. I mean, you're using standard Java libraries, whether that's streams or anything like that. You're using. You don't have to learn some new awesome JavaScript library of the week to do the new awesome thing of the week. It's JavaScript. Most of the time, what you would normally do in a regular old thick Java client, you can do in Google Web Toolkit. There you go.